Well, good afternoon. Time to get started, so we will on this crisp fall day here in Florida. I know it's fall because the palm trees begin to have their fronds start to turn orange and yellow. I know I'm going to be out there raking them pretty soon. The pumpkins are getting ripe. I don't know. Does Florida grow pumpkins? They must grow pumpkins, do they? Yeah. Oranges, yeah. When do oranges get ripe?
No idea, actually.
Don't know? After a cold snap. Oh. Well, that could be a while. That could be like 3 or 4 years from now. I don't know. Depends on a cold snap. Okay. So like in January or December, January? Okay. Well, we have that to look forward to. Fresh oranges. Well, today, as you can see from the PowerPoint in the sky, we'll talk a little bit about, we've been talking about things in the 19th century. We talked about the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy, talked about colonialism. All those things are going to go together to have a build-up to World War I. And you see this little cartoon here, political cartoon, I guess you'd call it, right? It's in French, so I know you have to pardon my French. Les enfants terribles, because my French isn't very good, so those of you who know French may not like my pronunciation. But it means the terrible child, the bad boy, right? And that's the guy standing up in a boat. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a rowboat, but you're not supposed to stand up in a rowboat. That's sort of like the first rule of being in a rowboat. Don't stand up in a rowboat. Stay seated. You need the low center of gravity, and this guy's up there, and he's not only is he standing, he's rocking the boat. See? You can tell. Who is that guy? Well, that's Wilhelm II. Rocking the boat. And look at the other guys in the boat. They're not too happy. These are the guys who are the leaders of Russia, England, Austria, all the other leaders of Europe are upset. Why? Because this kid, this terrible child, this bad boy is creating trouble. Bismarck, if you remember we talked about Bismarck, he had set up a nice balance of power, right? He'd made treaties, he'd unified Germany, he made a treaty with Russia, he made a treaty with France. Everybody was, I don't know if they were completely happy, but at least they knew things were stable, right? Something to be said for stability. A lot less people die when things are stable, I guess is what I'm saying. So Bismarck had actually set up a triple alliance. That triple alliance, as it was called, was between Germany, Austria, and Italy. Bismarck had also made good terms with Russia. They actually had signed a treaty, basically what we would call a mutual non-aggression treaty. What does that mean? That means you won't attack me, I won't attack you. Right? Sort of truce, right? If you have brothers and sisters, you say, hey, truce. Don't hit me right now. I'm sure your brothers and sisters never hit you. But you say, truce. Okay. So you had the truce going on there, kind of a treaty. And then enters the terrible infant, the bad boy, William II, Wilhelm II. He wants to expand. He believes it's Germany's time to grow. And so he begins to want to expand to the east. And so he does. Well, here's a picture of him. He's an interesting guy, really, I think. He is related to Queen Victoria, as most of those people were. So that means he's related to the current Queen of England. I think he looks a little bit like Prince Charles, if you know who that is. Now you notice in this photograph, and now we have photographs, we're getting that new. It does not show his left arm. That's on purpose. He had a bad left arm since birth. Again, I don't like to try to psychoanalyze people, but some people are trying to psychoanalyze him, and they say that made a difference because he always wanted to sort of compensate for his bad arm. So perhaps that made him more aggressive. I don't know.
So he didn't have an arm?
He had an arm, but he couldn't really use it. Okay? I don't know. It's congenital problem with his arm, right? Didn't really, I think, he had an arm, but it was kind of small and it couldn't really, not functional. Right? So, at any rate, some people have done, analyzed that. Those of you who are the psychology majors who have already given up on me, you can now turn your attention to Wilhelm II. I mean, you say, this guy, you don't want to analyze me anymore. It's boring because you've already figured me out. Crazy guy. Well, Wilhelm II perhaps has been trying to compensate. I don't know. I think it's hard enough to psychoanalyze somebody who's sitting right in front of you, let alone a guy who's been dead for a while. But people still do it, trust me, especially with history. Well, what happens is when 1890 comes, Wilhelm II's in power. Bismarck is still the prime minister, but Wilhelm II will not approve another agreement with Russia. It was time to renew that treaty. And he doesn't want to do it. He's not going to do it. Bismarck knows what this means because he's already been, he's already figured out that this guy wants to expand, and so Bismarck resigns. Now then this sends two bad signals to everybody else around Europe. It's him rocking a boat. One rock is, I'm not going to sign that agreement with Russia. The other one is, Bismarck resigns. The whole boat's going to tip over. If you're out in the middle of the lake or whatever and the rowboat tips over, well, I've been there. You get a little wet. You got to pick up your stuff. You got to try to make it back to shore, maybe try to haul the boat back in. Well, Bismarck resigns. So guess what? A couple years later, Russia decides if I can't make a deal with Germany, you know what? I'm going to make a deal with France. Why? France is on the other side of Germany, right? If you take a look at Germany, it is France on one side and Russia on the other. If the Russians and the French both have a deal that says if Germany attacks either one of us, we both attack Germany. An attack on France is like an attack on Germany. An attack on Germany is like an attack on France. This means that if Germany enters into a conflict with either one, they're entering into it with both. They have to fight what's called a two-front war. Right? The two-front war. You want to try to avoid those. In war and in life. Right? Choose, here's good advice. Choose your battles well. Sometimes I try to tell people that, and they don't always listen to me. But, not everything has to be a battle. You can kind of let some things go. That's what I mean by choose your battles well. Some things you aren't going to win anyway. Some things don't matter that much. So why make it into a big deal that you're probably going to lose or, expend all your energy? Anyway, so the idea here was it would deter Germany, Wilhelm II, from attacking either one of them because he knows if he attacks one of them, he's attacking both. And Germany would have to divide their military or whatever to both fronts immediately. Well, about 10 years later, we're going to see England gets really nervous about Germany. Why? Germany is building, Wilhelm is building up his navy. He's actually wants to be like England. That's, I guess it would have been his grandmother, Queen Victoria, you know, and now England has the great navy, the greatest fleet in the world, everybody says. And look how powerful they are. They're just a little island. Look how great Germany could be if we had a great navy. So he begins to imitate what the British have done and begins to build up all kinds of naval forces. Now, they're not matching England yet, but they are getting England worried. So England says, you know what? We don't usually like to do this, but we're going to side with the French. We're going to side with the French on this. England and France don't normally get along, right? You understand. But now they have a common enemy. Remember that little saying I said? My enemy's enemy is my friend. So now France is suddenly England's friend. Why? Because we have a common enemy, Germany. Germany's making threats now even to England through the Navy. And then a couple of years later, England signs an agreement with Russia so that we end up having a new alliance of three major powers, Russia, France, and England, in what comes to be known as the Triple Entente by 1907. So remember, we had the Triple Alliance, and now we have the Triple Entente. These alliance systems are designed, you know, they don't go into the meeting saying, hey, let's do this so we can have an even bigger war. But we're going to see that that's what this does. It creates a bigger war. It's going to create. That's a spoiler alert. It's going to create a bigger war. So what we end up seeing then is the Triple Alliance versus the Triple Entente. It's a cage match. Do they still have those? A cage match. You know what I talk about when I say a cage match? No? Wrestling? You know the wrestling? They get a ring, and then they put like a cage over it, and then they lock the guys in there, and they can't get out, in theory. Well, we're going to have a European cage match. But it's not going to stay in the cage because it's going to leave Europe as well. So now, yes?
So the Triple Entente is England, France, England, Russia, and France?
Yeah, I would just call it England, France, and Russia. Now all have an agreement with each other. Basically, if you attack any one of those, you've attacked all of them. We're going to work together. Why? We have a common enemy, Germany. Now, I want you to know I've been working again in what I call my PowerPoint lab, slaving over my hot laptop to create for you yet another graphic. I just want to prepare you ahead of time. It's kind of like, you know, when people watch things and it says, warning, the following may be shocking, may be disturbing, too much for you to handle. That's what I'm saying here. So you may have to avert your eyes because of this next graphic. It's so graphic. This is a graphic. Now look at that, huh? Lines. See, that's not enough? All right, how about a title? Look at that. Pre-World War II alliances. And I was going to change up the fonts, but I decided it would be too much. So here we come. Triple Alliance. Boom. Look at that in a little color box. So you know that that's the Triple Alliance. Versus, see, it's the cage match, the Triple Entente. See, one's in a black box with color in it, the other's in a white box with color around it. So, you know, just mix it up a little. One is, I don't know what color that is, purpley, light purpley. What is it?
Lavender.
Lavender. Well, you know, I guess it is Entente. That sounds kind of lavender. All right, here it is. Boom, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Look at that. They all match in colors. They all match with their borders. They all match in the fonts. And, you know, this takes a lot of, this doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen that you get a graphic like this. You've got to plan it. And then here comes the Triple Entente. Boom, Russia. Boom, France. Boom, England. There you go. Just in case you hadn't gotten it before, here's a little vision. You know, some people learn visually. Some people learn, you know, by hearing, auditory. Some people learn by visual. Some people learn by, I don't know, experiential. That's why you're in this class. It's an experience. Well, she didn't have to agree that quickly. And some people, they just don't learn. But they say that to you. Will you never learn? Maybe your mother said that to you sometime. Not me. But your mother can say that kind of thing and get away with it. I can't. Anyway, there it is. All right, you got it? It's simple, but it's going to mean a lot in a few years. And we're talking now, 1904 roughly. This is all fixed, right? 1904, 1905. Within a decade, this is going to make a big difference. All right, so these alliances then. Now look, we got another little cartoon, another little political cartoon. The Marine Painters of England and Germany. You see that? The guy from England's on the left. His name is Edward. He's Edward, King Edward. And he's saying to his nephew Wilhelm on the right, what is he saying? He's saying, your little marine masterpiece is too ambitious. Keep it a study. Well, you art people know what it means. A study is just like a little small, there's a big painting, you do a little painting just to kind of study the big painting. You don't want to actually copy the big painting. You're just making a study of it. Oh, what colors did they use? How did they do this and that? So he's saying, basically here, Germany should not try to copy us. You're being too ambitious. Here's all of my navy, and now you're trying to copy it on your side with your painting or whatever. Don't do it. That's what's got England so worried. Because after all, they're on an island. They're not too worried about a German army. But they are worried about a German navy. Right? So, both of these alliances, all these countries, begin to prepare military plans. Contingency plans, I think is what they might call them in the military. What do we mean? Well, I imagine Russia, France, and England say, okay, what if Germany attacks France? What are we going to do? What's our plan? What if Germany attacks Russia? What's our plan? What if Germany makes a naval assault on England? What's our plan? Right? And vice versa. Right? The United States has all kinds of contingency plans. They've thought about things that hopefully will never happen. A lot of them will not happen. But the military, you don't want to sort of wake up in the middle of the one night and something has happened and you've got no plans at all. Oh, Russia did this. North Korea did this. China did this. They try to anticipate what these countries might do and then how could we best respond in different scenarios. That's what these guys are doing in the Pentagon, by the way. They don't just sit around playing video games like some people do. They're actually thinking about these things. And then what do we do? What weapons do we need? What tactical things do we do? Do we send out the Air Force and Navy? So in other words, hopefully they don't have to use those plans. But you want to have those plans just in case. And I'm sure they got plenty of them now for terrorist kind of things as well, right? Somebody sets off a dirty bomb in New York City. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle it? How are we going to evacuate the people? How are we going to contain it? These are contingency plans. That's what these guys are doing. And they also begin to build up arms. You can't have a real military plan if you don't have any weapons. A bunch of guys with sticks aren't going to be much of a match for a guy with, big weapons, right? So you got to have some weapons. The idea here was to ensure victory. Now, the other thing I think you need to keep in mind is that all the wars for about the past, almost 100 years, right? Since Napoleon, pretty much, all the wars have been small. I'm not saying there weren't any wars. There were some wars, like the Austro-Prussian War, the Franco-Prussian War, and so forth. But those were small wars. Lasted 7 weeks, lasted less than 7 weeks in some cases, so forth. Most of them have been done in a year or less. And they've been limited. The idea here is that sort of the belief that they have, that I think most people in Europe has, that the war would be quick. If we have to fight, and they're probably saying we probably will, Wilhelm, we can defeat him quickly and get it done in a few months, maybe a year, and put this behind us and move on to better things. Well, just to show you some of the tension, let me tell you a couple of things that happened in 1905, one of them. Wilhelm II, or William II, goes to Morocco. Is it a vacation? Well, not really. Why does he go to Morocco? I can tell you why. Because Morocco is a territory of France. I don't even think it's a colony yet, but it's a territory that France controls. And so what is he doing down there? He's basically down there stirring up trouble. He's telling the people of Morocco, you guys really ought to be independent. Why are you under the thumb of the French? France had it as a protectorate, and they were ready to move it to colony status. And now he goes down there and he says, you know what? You guys don't need to be under the French. You know what you guys really need to do? You guys need to be independent. You guys need to have your own country. Nationalism, right? Nationalism's selling, and they love it. And of course, the implication is Germany is going to help us break free from France. Germany's got a great navy now. They're building up their navy. They're going to bring their ships down here and help us. They'll bring their troops down here and help us. France wouldn't dare to mess with us if Germany's on our side. Well, that's implied. But it's stirring up trouble. World War I could have started in Morocco, is what I'm saying. Could have started in 1905 in Morocco. The French are outraged, as they often are. Outrage, that's a good word for the French. They're very upset about it. And they threaten a war. But this calms down. War does not break out. But what I'm saying is the tension is there. The threatening posturing, is there. Again, in 1911, the Germans send gunboats to Morocco. But they eventually back down. Well, why is this? Well, again, it kind of follows that principle. My enemy's enemy is my friend, right? Morocco, if it's creating trouble for France, that's good for me if I'm German. If I'm Germany, I want France to have as many problems as it can have. Because the more problems it has, the less focus it's going to be on me as a problem. And more likely it's going to be that I can get what I want. Well, maybe you have a younger sibling. You get your younger sibling worked up against your older sibling. That distracts them. Or maybe you try to distract your parents by letting them know what one of the other siblings has done, kind of divert attention from what you have done. I'm not saying any of you have ever done anything like this, but you know what I'm talking about. If you can distract, well, it's kind of like, when you fake something, right? Like, say, in basketball, you fake a pass one way and then you go the other way. You turn one way and then you go the other way, or whatever. Same in football. If you can have a little deception there, have a little play, well, it helps you out. That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. Now, where the war is really going to break out is going to be in the Balkans. I don't know how much you're aware of the Balkans. But here's a map showing the Balkans, right? You got Italy over here on the left, right? You got Greece down at the bottom of this map. Do you see that? And then notice what you got up here, the Ottoman Empire over to the right. And way up at the top, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. See that? All right. Remember I told you, I don't know when, but it's been a while, so I'll say it again, that the Ottoman Empire was in decline. In fact, the Ottoman Empire got a nickname in the 19th century, in the 1800s, that it was the sick old man of Europe. And people were kind of waiting for it to die so they could come get all his stuff. I tell you a lot of encouraging stuff in here, I guess. Right? That's what sometimes people do. They wait for the sick old relative to die, and they're wondering, hey, who's going to get the diamond rings? Who's going to get the house? Who's going to get the car? Who's going to get that beautiful home in Lakeland? Right? Or wherever, in the mountains, someplace. You know, people begin to talk about that. They don't, it's not a nice thing, but people begin to think about it. And they do begin to talk about it. And they begin to strategize. Suddenly, even though they haven't paid much attention to Aunt Bessie, they start showing up. Aunt Bessie, would you like to come to Thanksgiving dinner? Oh, that's so nice of you to invite me. And they start being real nice to Aunt Bessie. Why? I figure, well, Aunt Bessie's going to have a will, and if I'm nicer to her, maybe she'll change the will and give me more stuff. Now, see, I hate to even verbalize it. That's what people do. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it happens. I had a great aunt. Well, I can't tell you stories, but let me just say, it did not end well for her when she gave power of attorney to a cousin of mine. Yeah, he took everything. Her house, her car, her money, put her in a home. Well, anyway, it's a sad story. Sad story. And, I went to visit her. I said, well, what, there's nothing I could do. Right? Really, he had power of attorney. I guess I could, I was too young to think about hiring a lawyer and trying to do all that kind of stuff. It gets real messy. So what I'm saying is, when people get older and they've got possessions, people start looking at it. Ottoman Empire is weak. Everybody knows it is eventually going to collapse. And when it does, it's got a lot of territory, got a lot of possessions, got a lot of resources. Everybody starts looking at it. Britain starts looking, of course, at all the waterways, saying, oh, that would be nice to control the access to the Black Sea. Maybe that coastal area. The Austrians start looking at the Balkans and saying, you know what, that'd be a nice thing. That's just like buying a property next door. We just add that right into our empire. Wouldn't that be nice? By the way, the Russians are also looking at this. And the Austrians. And the British. And the French. All of them, really. Well, one of the problems in this area is that the Balkans, for a large measure of the Balkans, Bulgarians, Serbians, and so forth, these are Slavic people. People are normally divided by their language groups. That's the way anthropologists do it. It's the way historians do it. It makes sense, right? If we can't communicate, it's harder for us to have a lot in common. If I talk to you, you don't understand me. You talk to me, I don't understand you. We don't have much of exchange of ideas. We can point to things, right? We can do a few things, but, it's hard. So people that share the same language also normally share a lot of the same sort of culture. Maybe the same food, maybe the same religion, maybe a lot of other things the same, right? And so the Slavic people, you know who they have stuff in common with? The Russians. Because the Russians have a Slavic language. Russian is a Slavic language. And Russia is the most powerful Slavic nation. I don't know if you ever thought of it that way, but it is. And therefore the Bulgarians, the Serbians, and others look to Russia for help. Kind of like the powerful big brother or uncle or something, is going to help you out. When people threaten you, say, hey, I want to get my big brother to come and take care of you, right? I'm sure you've never said that either. Well, so in 1912, Russia begins to push attacks of the Ottomans. And a lot of these Slavs begin to go again for independence. It's nationalism. The Serbs, the Bulgarians, the Romanians, even the Greeks who are not Slavic, they all begin to push for independence from the Ottomans. Why? Because the Ottomans are weak. By the way, once somebody begins to look weak, other people take advantage of it. Right? It happens. Somebody's a boxer, right? He's boxing another guy. He sees the guy's getting a cut over his eye. What does he do? He aims for that eye. Make the cut bigger. They see a guy's got a bad leg. They go after that leg. Right? It happens in sports. It happens in warfare. It happens in life. It's like the piranha smelling the blood. The little piranha. They smell the blood. They all start to swarm around you. We used to have a game when I was in school. I guess, I don't know, it wasn't really a game. You guys probably never had this because you guys are much more civilized than when I grew up. They called it dog pile. You ever heard of this game? The dog pile? On the playground? I think it was more a guy thing, but who knows these days. What would happen? There'd be like a guy that some people decided they didn't like him. They'd push him to the ground. And then somebody would yell, dog pile. And all these guys would just run and jump on top of him. Maybe 20 guys, 15 guys. Yeah, you can get pretty hurt doing that. That's kind of the way it is in life sometimes. You get down and somebody yells dog pile. Ooh, they all come after you. Or like a little piranha. Well, it's different imagery. None of it's nice. So I probably shouldn't say it. But that's what's happening to the Ottomans. They're coming at it from all directions. Everybody's wanting to take their stuff. The Turks are weak and they are defeated in the First Balkan War. This gives then fuel to others to try it. And we start to see that the Serbs decide, you know what, we can take even more territory. We want a greater Serbia. And so that's what they do. The Serbs want territory in the Balkans, so we have a second Balkan War. And these other smaller territories begin to help one another. The Serbs begin to help, are being helped by even the Greeks who aren't Slavic. We have a common enemy, right? The Ottomans. The Romanians. And get this, even some Turks are helping fight against the Ottomans who are Turks. What? Yeah, there's a group of Turks who don't want Ottoman Empire to be around. They want an independent Turkey. It's a nationalist group. They're called the Young Turks. By the way, the Young Turks weren't all young. And they weren't all Turks. But they did want to get rid of the Ottoman Empire. So, I mean, even from the inside, the Turks got problems. The Ottomans got problems. All right, so there's an upheaval here. Balkan crisis. Have you ever heard the phrase Balkanization? Balkanization. It's a word out there. You probably haven't heard it much. But Balkanization means that things get fragmented and divided along sort of ethnic and national ties. And that's what's happening. This Ottoman Empire controlled this territory for a long time. Now it begins to fragment into smaller nations like Bosnia, Serbia, Albania, Romania, Bulgaria, etc. So here is a map of the area, or kind of a satellite image superimposed with the map, just so you can see how mountainous this area is. Like Romania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia. You can see there's quite a few mountains and hills here. And kind of see, this is the Balkan areas, and this is what it looks like. Ottoman territory, yes, this was all Ottoman territory at one time. But it's going to be fragmented into these small territories that will then be instead of becoming independent, are kind of gobbled up by the Austrians, the Russians, and others. Well, in the course of this, Serbia starts to get big. Serbia begins to double, and Serbia wants Bosnia to be a part of its, and Herzegovina to be a part of its territory. However, Bosnia and Herzegovina now belong to Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were Austrian territory. They gained it in 1908. Serbs didn't like that. I guess that's probably an understatement. That should be part of our territory. Even though the Albanians had a lot of differences from the Serbs. A lot of differences. So this is what creates a very tense situation. 1908, 1909, 1910. We get ourselves up to June of 1914. This date ought to mean something to you. If it doesn't yet, maybe it will after this. We're talking about the lead up to World War I, so I don't like to give you the spoiler alert, but this is going to be where World War I gets started. It gets started in the Balkan states. It gets started in 1914, and if we focus in on it, it's going to get started, at least the initial event that will precipitate World War I, gets started in Bosnia, in a town called Sarajevo. Well, nationalism that we've been talking about is critical to all this. All of these groups, ethnic groups, wanted their own nation. Albania wanted Albania. The Serbs wanted Serbia. The Croatians wanted Croatia, and so forth. So nationalism is a big part of this, and is what is going to lead to World War I. We're going to see a buildup of arms in Europe, which is also going to lead to this. And we have the idea that Germany and Italy are catching up, as we've been saying. Remember, just recently unified, let's say 40 years before. So they have something to prove. They have territory they'd like to gain, especially Germany. But they had to catch up not only in territory and colonies, they had to catch up in industrialization as well. And Germany's doing a pretty good job of that by building this navy, trying to build its factories, trying to become industrialized, trying to become a military powerhouse, trying to expand its territory. And so to them, Europe is the first place that they think they need to expand. They're going to expand primarily to the east. There's a lot of territory out there that the Russians controlled, but that wasn't sort of technically Russian territory, especially places like Poland. Territory later be called Czechoslovakia, Latvia, Estonia. You know, there's a lot of territories out there that the Russians had controlled it, but as far as the Germans were concerned, it's not Russia. And of course, so I'm just listing a lot of things that mean, you know, why things are very tense in 1914. The other is Pan-Slavism. We talked about the Slavs, right? The Slavic language, the Serbs, the Bulgarians, the Russians, and so forth. They speak a Slavic language. And Russia had been promoting Pan-Slavism. That is, that all of us Slavic people ought to be working with each other, right? We're all in this together. We're all Slavs. And we, of course, if I'm now being Russia, and we as Russia want to help out our Slavic brothers in, you know, being picked on by the Austrians and the Ottomans and whoever else, right? So count on us. We're on your side because after all, we're in this together because we're all Slavic people. Okay? So that's another thing that's a factor here. Imperialism, nationalism, industrialization, playing catch-up, tense things, Ottoman Empire falling apart, Pan-Slavism. I mean, it's like a powder keg. It's like explosives. And it's already primed and ready to go. All somebody has to do is ignite it. Here's what's going to ignite it. It's a guy by the name of Archduke Ferdinand. Archduke Ferdinand. If you don't know that name, well, maybe you should learn it. Archduke Ferdinand was in line to be, I guess he was in line to be the next ruler of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? But, you know, kind of like the vice president, he gets sent to things that the current ruler doesn't want to go to. One of those was heading down to Sarajevo for a ceremony. He goes down on June 28th, 1914. He travels down. He's in Sarajevo. There's kind of a ceremony he's at. They put him in a car. He's in an open car. We got cars now. We hadn't had that before, right? In this class. But yeah, we got cars. He's riding in an open car. We're going to show a picture of it in a second. And he, you know, kind of waving. You'll see the massive crowds when I show you the picture. And of course, as you probably already know, he will be assassinated on this day by a Bosnian. He's in Bosnia. It's by a Bosnian. But this Bosnian has connections to the Serbs, the Serbians. In fact, he has connections, most people believe, to an organization called the Black Hand Society. Sounds like kind of an ominous name for a group. Depending on who you are, the Black Hand Society is terrorists, or you might say they are Serbian nationalists, or depends on your perspective. But most people call them Serbian terrorist group. And so they have encouraged this guy to do this. I don't know if they gave him any money, if they encouraged, but they certainly encouraged him to do it. And he comes out and he shoots the Archduke. He actually gets off more than one shot. You know what happened was the driver, I guess, I don't know, I need to look at it more. The driver must not have known the streets very well, either that or maybe he was in on it. But I think he was the driver, the Duke's driver. They had this car. He's driving down the road. The gunshots come, and so the guy tries to turn to get off the main road. And he turns, but he actually ends up turning down an alley. Which then, you know, couldn't really get out of the alley very easily, and that's when the guy got him, okay? So when this happens, of course, this is now Austrian-controlled territory. This is the next in the throne to the Austrian, you know, so the Austrians are very upset. And they know the Serbs are involved, and so they issue an ultimatum to the Serbs. You Serbs were behind this. You Serbs need to make reparations. You Serbs need to do something about this, need to turn over these people, so on and so forth. You can imagine what they might have said. By the way, here's the picture. You know, you can see the car. Look at the crowds. There's at least 4 people there. A couple down there. Notice in the background a mosque. You see that? That's a minaret. This points out that Bosnia is a Muslim country. It doesn't really fit with Serbia, certainly religiously. Serbs are Orthodox Christians, kind of like Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox. But this Islam, which had come here primarily under the influence of the Ottoman Empire, was considered to be something, you know, the Serbs didn't like. Maybe they could stamp it out. I don't know what their plans were. But anyway, just points out that, it also points out that the Austrians had a tough time. Their empire, whereas the Germans had unified German-speaking people under them, and there were some that were Roman Catholics and some who were Protestants, but they all spoke German. All right, still created some problems. But the Austrians are putting together an empire of a lot of different groups, a lot of different languages, a lot of different religions and things. It really makes it tough to hold an empire together. For example, we call it the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Hungarian people were completely different ethnically, linguistically from the Austrians. They spoke Hungarian, which is a very difficult language to learn, and it's actually related to Turkish, and it's related to languages of Central Asia. That's originally where the Hungarians, the Magyars, come from. And so they're taking these people and trying to incorporate them into Austria. Then they had Bosnia. Bosnia's Muslims, and they speak a different language, Slavic language. So they're bringing people in to speak Slavic languages, the sort of Turkic language of Hungary, different religions. Makes it tough to hold it together. And so now they send this guy down here and he gets assassinated. So you can see there's at least one person waving, maybe two. There's a little kid. He's like, what's going on? He doesn't know what's going on. So he starts to get shot at. They turn down an alley. That's it. Now this is going to be the spark that begins World War I. The Germans are going to give the Austrians a blank check. That probably doesn't mean much to you today because you don't use checks, right? How many of you have a checking account? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 5, 6. Okay. So you actually have physical checks that you write. Okay, that's good. Maybe like 6 out of 40.
Isn't that good then?
A blank check, sure, it's good. Yeah. See, if it's a blank check, that means if I sign the check and I hand it to you. Now, you can make the check out to anybody you want. You can make it out for any amount. I can tell you if it's from me, though, it's maybe not as good a deal as what you might think. Okay? I'll just put it that way. The check's going to bounce, right? Maybe. So, but what I'm saying is, that's what it is. Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, it's always seen as a positive. Here's a blank check. You do, you write it out. You do it the way you want. I'll sign it. I back it. Basically saying, I'm going to back what you want to do. And so that's really what it's saying. The Germans are telling the Austrians, you take care of this. We're behind you. Well, why? Because the Germans really wanted war. This was a good excuse for it. And actually the Germans, don't take the initial blame, right? It's a terrorist group attacking the Austrians. The Austrians are defending themselves. We have a treaty with the Austrians. We have to defend them. You see? Well, it's not our fault. Okay. Well, that's sort of the idea. Well, Serbia agreed to most of the demands, but that really wasn't enough because everybody, especially Germany convinced Austria, you know what? They need to deal with Serbia. Now, of course, people knew if Austria led an attack on Serbia, what was going to happen? The Russians would get involved. And if the Russians got involved, the French would get involved. And if the French got involved, probably the English would get involved. And of course, if the Austrians got involved, the Italians would probably get involved. And the Germans would definitely get involved. Next thing you know, you're going to go from having this guy being shot in Sarajevo is going to lead to a European conflict, which is going to become a worldwide conflict. That's why it's important. Well, notice how quickly these events happen, right? If we go back and take a look, when is he shot? June 28th. Okay, now take a look. July 28th, a month later, Austria declares war on Serbia. 4 weeks later. 2 days later, the Russians begin to mobilize their troops. Now, that doesn't mean they moved any troops out of Russia, but Russia is a very big country, if you hadn't noticed. Pretty big. And so what they began to do is move their troops from inside of Russia to the borders of Russia so that they could invade. That's seen as a provocative act. by the Germans and others, and they take it as an act of war. That the Russians are getting ready to back the Serbians against the Austrians. And that's really all that the Germans needed to then take the next step. What, a day later, 2 days later? August the 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. Why? Because Russia is amassing troops on the border. They're going to invade, they're going to attack Serbia, are going to help Serbia and attack Austria, and therefore we're here to help our friends the Austrians. And at the same time, Germany warns France to stay neutral. But you remember, France had that agreement with Russia that if the Russians were attacked. Now, technically the Russians haven't been attacked yet, but Germany did declare war on them. The attack's coming. Guess what? The French refused. Said, you know what? No, we will not remain neutral. So Germany says, okay, we declare war on you too. So we see within about 4 weeks, less than 5 weeks from this assassination, we've got war now between Germany, France, Russia. The Austrians are on the German side. You know, all these people are getting involved on the continent in a war. It was about an assassination by a lone gunman who has ties to a Serbian group. It's a powder keg. It's an explosive situation, and this has precipitated this war. But like I told you, people have been getting ready for this war for 15 years, more than 10 years. They've been getting ready for this war. And now here is their chance. Why? They believe they're going to win. By the way, here's some advice. Not that I give fighting advice. I don't advise you to fight. But if you are going to fight, you probably ought to figure out if you can win before you start. If you don't think you got any chance of winning, maybe that's not the fight for you. But of course, people don't always do what is rational, right? People got a lot of emotions, and a lot of times they do what is emotional. Yes?
I have a question. I was looking at the terms for this week, and none of them have anything to do with World War I. They're actually about stuff that are like...
Yeah, it hasn't been updated yet.
Reprised, yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been updated. That shouldn't even be public yet. Yeah. Yeah. Should not be public. Is it public? Well,
If you go to
it's not.
assignments.
What's that?
If you go to assignments.
Oh, you're bypassing it. Oh, no, don't go to assignments. Go to the week by week. Yeah.
That week's not much.
Okay? Yeah. Okay.
Do we have them due at the end of the week?
Yes.
Do we have terms to do on
Yes.
that?
Yes. Yeah. They'll be up today. But yeah, you weren't supposed to start them yet because they're not published. So if you go to the week and nothing's published, don't go to the assignments. Because there will be stuff on, if you go and look at all the assignments, they will be there, but they'll be from another course. Because I'm using it as an outline. Okay? I did not understand that you could see assignments that I had not published. But that's all right. Check it later today. So you're that far ahead. That's impressive. This must be the first time, because this is the first time I'm hearing it. Well, let's move on. We got some stuff to finish. Perhaps you're doing the terms while you're sitting in class instead of listening to the lecture. I think that's what most of you do, which I don't advise you to do. You should be doing that from the chapter of the book, which is listed for the week. And if the assignments don't seem to match, they're the wrong assignment because it's not been published. All right, let me finish this so we can go on to a wonderful vacation. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to see that the Schlieffen Plan will take place. And I can go through this a lot quicker if you'd like. You can just watch it on the video. Maybe that's what I should do. Just get it done. Huh? That's what everybody wants. Okay, August the 3rd, 1914, the Germans will use the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan is an invasion of France through Belgium. It'll be a sweeping plan. You can see it on the map here, the red arrows. They want to take out France before the Russians can mobilize and take them out. That means that once they do that, Britain will enter the war on August the 4th. So now we have Britain, France, Russia, all involved in this war. Now here's a map that shows you the Schlieffen Plan in more detail. Coming through neutral Belgium, Belgium's not involved in this, but the Germans have decided, General Schlieffen came up with the plan to invade through Belgium and to knock out France quickly. This was the plan. By the way, it's not going to work. The war will then proceed. Italy, who's supposed to back the Germans and the Austrians, decided, no, this is an aggressive war. We only agreed to a defensive war. Well, I suppose they're sort of right. But actually, they had also gotten a deal with the Entente, maybe a better deal. They wanted to make sure they got some territory out of this. And they sort of sized it up and thought, I don't think Germany's going to win. We're going to side with the other side. Okay. So Italy doesn't really join in as they were supposed to. So the German plan then, defeat France in a few weeks, hold off Russia, and if we defeat France in a few weeks, then we can turn and put all our forces on Russia. Remember, this is a two-front war. They're trying to eliminate the two fronts. The weakest front they thought was France. So we're going to hit that first. So we see then that on September the 5th, the Germans near Paris, and it looks like this plan is going to work, and they're going to defeat them. But, by the way, this is September. Assassination, end of June. War starts end of July, early August. Now it's into September, early September. This is all happening very, very fast. They are near taking Paris. And we see, however, that the French decide to line up behind the Marne River. And when they line up behind the Marne River, we will see that the Germans are not defeated, but they are held off, and everything slows down. A war of motion now becomes a war of stagnation. Also add to that later in September the Germans are defeated by the Russians in the Battle of Tannenberg. So they're stalled in France, they're defeated by the Russians, they're being held off by the Russians. And the war that was supposed to be a quick war, the war that was supposed to be a war of motion, now becomes a war of attrition. Attrition. What do I mean by that? Attrition means you line up your guys on one side and I line up my guys on the other side, and in the end, somebody that's got somebody left is won. Right? You got 1,000 guys, I got 1,000 guys. At the end of the day, I've got 400 guys and you got no guys. That means I win. That's what it is. That's a war of attrition. Now, you have to add to that because, at the beginning of the war here, people obviously don't understand how horrendous World War I is going to be, and it will be terrible. We're now 100 years away from it, and a lot of people have forgotten how terrible it was. Okay? But it was a very terrible war. Why? Industrialization has brought the weapons of industrialization to tactics that are still being fought before that time. Yeah? Okay. So a lot of people are ready to fight. There's war fever. Why? Like I said, all the wars have been quick. All the wars have been fought quickly. Many people had nationalism and imperialism. They believed their country was the best. There's no way those Germans will defeat us because we're the best, right? And, by the way, this war has started in the summer, late summer. It'll probably be done by Christmas. And if you go off to war, these guys will go down and get on the trains and head off to war, and all the ladies will be down there sending you off, waving, maybe some hugs and kisses, and saying, "Oh, I'll be waiting for you." And your idea is you're going to come back around Christmas time, you're going to have a chest full of medals. You're going to be victorious. And you and your lady will celebrate the new year as you as a hero. I mean, that's what people are thinking. A lot of people. And they're thinking that on both sides. So a lot of people sign up. A lot of guys go and sign up. Why? They want to be a hero. There have been no long wars for maybe about 100 years. Most people think a generation's about 40 years. At least 2 or 3 generations, we've not had a really long, terrible war. Never had a war like this. In fact, this gets the name the war to end all wars. The Great War, some people called it. Great because it was huge. And there was a lot of propaganda, stereotypes about how terrible the Germans are. The Germans are Huns. The Germans are going to, they would show depictions of the Germans with bayonets on their guns. And they have stabbed a baby and they're walking around with it on their bayonets. This is what the Germans are going to do. They're going to kill babies. They're going to rape women. They're going to burn down towns. They're cruel. They're animals. We have to stop them. Plus, we're going to win. We're going to win against these terrible people. And it was the same on the other side. There's propaganda. There's, they were saying the French were really weak. Germans had all the French are weak. We can just defeat them easily. Well, didn't quite go that way, did it? Then the new technology increases the destruction. The way warfare had been fought, say in the time of Napoleon, 100 years before this, is that people had rifles. A lot of those rifles you had to load one bullet at a time. Not only did you have to load it, you had to actually put the powder in it, tamp it down. So that means you take a shot, boom, got to lower your rifle, got to measure the powder, got to pack it down, got to put it in, boom, boom. And then you take another shot. So if you were really good at that, you could take a shot maybe every minute, 45 seconds to a minute, between shots. Once your gun got really hot, it got kind of dangerous to be pouring gunpowder down the barrel. So, there were limitations. It wasn't like today where you pull a thing, and you shoot off, 100 rounds in, 100 seconds. I don't know how long it takes. But anyway, you can shoot off a lot of rounds in a minute. Whereas there, you're shooting one in a minute. Right? So, now they're not quite up to that yet in World War I, but they're getting there. They have machine guns. Will be introduced during World War I because of the technology. You know what else they have? Poison gas. They call it mustard gas. Mustard gas gets its name because when it's released into the air, it has a yellow look, kind of like mustard. And basically, it's a corrosive. When you breathe it in, it burns up your lungs. It will burn up your skin if it gets on your skin, your eyes. It's terrible stuff. It's basically chlorine gas is what it is. So this is why they tell you, by the way, when you buy cleaning products, don't mix the things with chlorine and the things with, things with ammonia and the things with bleach. Because if you mix ammonia and bleach, you produce this kind of a gas. If you do that, you will know it very quickly. And hopefully you can get away from it very quickly because it's real bad stuff. But that's what they had. They have it in canisters and things. They would launch it. Now the problem was when you launched it, the wind may change. And guess what? The thing you just launched at them starts floating back at you. So they had to hand out gas masks and like rubber suits. You had to wear this stuff over your other clothes. It's very hot. You had to get it on quick. You don't want to wear it all the time because it's too hot. So you'd only put it on when you had to, and a gas mask and everything else. And you'd need like a goggles or a hood or something because you don't want it to get in your eyes. It's terrible stuff. So we had poison gas. We had machine guns. You know what else we had? Barbed wire. Barbed wire was invented here in the United States. It was invented for the West, the frontier. When they started to fence the West. The West was huge plains where everything, animals just roam like buffalo and stuff. Give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play. They begin to fence it off to keep the sheep out of the cattle area because the sheep will eat it down really short to the ground. The cattle guys complained it would kill the grass and then their cattle had nothing to eat. So they had to put up fence. They made barbed wire. Barbed wire now is a part of war. They're going to put rolls of it out to stop people. Rolls of, you know what else they have? Landmines. Never had landmines before. So you could go out in an area and you could put a whole bunch of landmines and rolls of barbed wire. Then you come back and you use concrete to build a machine gun nest, they call it. Basically a defensive post with a machine gun in it. So you could fire off, and if somebody starts coming at you, guess what? You got all the advantage on the defense. The offense, you just got a guy running across the area with his gun, right? Stepping on landmines, hitting barbed wire, you're shooting at him with a machine gun. By the way, they had no new tactics. Like I said, new techniques, but no new tactics. And war becomes industrialized with barbed wire and trenches and machine guns and poison gas. See this poor guy over here? He got exposed to the poison gas. Started eating up his skin on his back. Like I just said, mustard gas, barbed wire, machine guns, heavy artillery, fortified concrete, landmines, trenches. They had heavy artillery. I mean, they had shells that were probably about as tall as I am, right? 5-6 feet tall at least, about this big around. They would put that into a giant cannon, fire it off, right? Have a row after row of them. Have a crew of guys just keep loading it. Things could go 2-3 miles. You could bombard the other side. That's what they did. Change the landscape so it looked like the moon. It's like with mud. There's no vegetation left. Everything got blown up. All the trees, all the plants, all the grass. Everything's gone. It's terrible. Terrible war. Most of this is happening in the West, in France. France becomes the Western Front. The defense really has the advantage. Here's those big guns I'm talking about. You see the crew here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, about five or six guys on a crew. You see how big it is? They'd load the shell here in the back. Here was their tactic. They began to shell before they began the invasion. Like the guys running across. They're going to soften up the enemy. So they fire these things off for hours, literally. And then we send our guys up out of the trenches to run across. You know what the guys do on the other side? You start shelling them, they just back up. You're not going to stay there during the shelling, right? I mean, so they back up a mile or so. And then once the shelling stops, guess what? Maybe they're going to attack now. Now we move back up. We get ready. There's no surprise. We know exactly what you're doing and when you're going to do it. The Battle of the Somme, just to give you an idea, you see this big gun here. They would place one of these guns every 20 yards for 14 miles. I'll let you do the math on how many guns that is. Every 20 yards, they placed one of these guns of this size. That's just enough room to maneuver around it. Put one here, 20 yards, one over there, one over there, one over there. And they did that for about 14 miles. And it's said for this one battle that they launched 1.5 million shells. 1.5 million, I mean, big shells. The Battle of Verdun. Like I said, the shells warn the troops of the enemy, and they back up, and then when it ends, they get ready. And then the troops, after the shelling ends, well, then we send our people over. What's our strategy? Run across that big area there, you know, with the barbed wire and a landmine we've just been shelling, and get to the other side and fight those guys. See if you can shoot them. See if you can kill them. See if you can get in their trench, because we got a trench on our side, they got a trench on their side. Actually, they have multiple trenches. Besides, they have machine guns, right? And so we see the Battle of Verdun. We still have about 4 minutes, so I'm going to take it. Even if you leave, I'll keep talking. Yeah, so go right ahead. Feel free. You don't want to be here, you don't need to be here. In fact, that goes maybe for next week too. It's up to you, right? I will still take attendance, but it's up to you. Germany loses 336,000 troops in this one battle. I'm not talking about the whole war. The Battle of Verdun. Now the battle goes on for quite a while. The French lose even more. So that means in this one battle, you have almost 1 million people dying. That's dying. And of course, there were lots of guys wounded. And this is part of the problem. In this battle, when people get wounded, mostly they die. Unlike today, you know, you send some guy over to Afghanistan or something, he can get, I mean, terrible things happen to him, and we can save his life because we have the equipment, you know, we have the stuff to do it. In World War I, we did not. So mostly if you had a bad wound, you were probably going to die. Not always, but you'd probably have your leg amputated or something like that, your arm. Well, we see submarines coming in. So let me put this up here. The British begin to blockade the Germans, and we see that the German submarines are something new. They're U-boats, they're Unterwasserboats, and they begin to attack ships. And in fact, the British were using passenger ships like the Lusitania to haul goods during the war. When that ship was sunk, May 7th, 1915, it had U.S. citizens on board. The U.S. then forced Germany to stop using unrestricted submarine warfare, or they said the United States would enter the war. But as the war progresses, the Germans stopped for about 1.5 years, but as the war progresses, the Germans resumed it because they felt they just couldn't win the war if they didn't stop supplies getting to Britain from the United States. And that's what brings the United States into war, not until 1917 in the spring. War had been going on now for almost 3 years. All right, 2 more screens. Let me put them up here. This is just a picture of the Lusitania. You can read that for yourself later. Let's get to the end of the war. And this will be my last screen for today. Germany had to fight a two-front war against France on the one side and Russia on the other, the West and the East. Another thing we haven't talked about yet that we will talk about is that during the war, Lenin has been leading a revolution in Russia, and that's going to mean that Russia will pull out of the war. And when Russia pulls out of the war, that's really when Germany feels like they don't have to fight the Russians anymore, and they help to orchestrate that. But when the U.S. enters the war with fresh troops and supplies, the Germans have been fighting this pretty much by themselves, everybody else, and they're beginning to run out of supplies. Their people are starving. And so on November the 8th, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm resigns, Wilhelm II. That leaves a fledgling government that then declares peace, sues for peace. November 11th, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson of the United States calls for a lenient peace. This is where we get Veterans Day that's coming up. Veterans Day was for many years on November 11th. We kind of move it around now. I don't know, maybe we've moved it back. But it really started off as Armistice Day, and it was about World War I. And after World War II, they expanded it to Veterans Day. All right. We'll see you later.